Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Adobe Live. I'm your host, Fabiola Lara. I'm an illustrator and content creator. And on this pro tips, I'm going to be diving into the audio track mixer, not to be confused with the audio clip mixer. And I'm so excited to show you how you can use the audio track mixer to really level up your audio. That way, before you go out and get a new camera, invest in audio editing. Okay, this is my tip to you. But welcome to the stream, everyone. Hello, Cody. Hello, Pixie Pew. Thanks for being here. If you have any questions throughout the stream, be sure to drop it in the chat. And don't forget to subscribe to Adobe Live on YouTube. That way you never miss a stream. All right, let's dive into the project. So for today, we have a lot going on. I decided I wanted to show you to demo this tutorial. I wanted to share with you this Instagram reel that I edited when I announced that I joined an artist agency. And it was it's the perfect video to demonstrate this because I have clip audio that I'm using from the actual camera. I also have voiceover audio. I also have sound effects and, of course, music. So all of these different types of audio get different treatments, and the audio track mixer is ideal for this. Okay, so just to show you here on my screen, I've got Premiere Pro, and my favorite workspace, just so you guys know, is vertical. And so this is what it would look like if you set yours to vertical, just so you can follow along. And you can see from this layout, I don't currently have the audio track mixer available. So don't worry, this is really easy. Just go over to Window and open up, click or select the audio track mixer. And this is what you'll get, which can be quite intimidating, but don't worry about it. You may have already used this a bit, but sometimes there's little things that you may not know. And I feel like on this pro tips, I'm going to make sure we get to it. And the first thing I'm going to do is show you kind of the clip. And before we get started on the actual editing, I want to show you how I have it set up right now. So the final edit will sound something like this. I'm just going to play a bit of it.
I'm joining the collab agency.
This means that aside from being a new member of an all-star roster, I now have an agent, so I no longer have to answer my own emails, process client feedback alone.
Okay, so they hate it.
Agree to client terms by default, or overbook myself because I feel bad saying no.
I can do it.
So that's what it looks like. Now let's go to how we're starting. These are kind of the audio tracks, bare bones. There's no effects or nothing. I have already auto matched some of the volumes. That way each track sounds the same. But in this one, we're going to talk about the audio track mixer, so I'm not going to go there. But if you press play, I'm going to let you listen to a bit of how this mix sounds right now, kind of at the beginning.
I'm joining the collab agency.
This means that aside from being a new member of an all-star roster, I now have an agent. So you can see you can barely hear any of the voiceover or dialogue. You can hear a lot of the sound effects and barely any music. So it's really not making sense. If you were to publish this as is, everybody would be confused and wonder why you posted it that way. So let's go over to the audio track mixer and start making some adjustments. The first thing I want to do, and I just want to show you in case you haven't seen this before. So I'm going to solo this track, which basically means that it will only play the audio for this track, which in this case is audio track 2. If you hit mute, if you hit this M, it would mute everything, but it would mute only this track. Because I'm doing solo instead of mute, it plays only this track. So let me play this for you so you can see what it sounds like.
I'm joining the collab agency.
This means that aside from being a new member, so even though it sounds kind of clean, like it doesn't sound like the audio is too full of noise or background noise or anything weird like that, it's really low and it's not very crisp. There's no vocal presence. It's kind of whatever. So let's pump it up. So I've renamed this main audio because it is the main audio. You can name it A-roll. I decided to name it main audio, just so you know. And the quick way to rename it is you just right click, rename. So I could name it A-roll. I'm going to rename it back to main audio because it's not necessarily A-roll. Anyway. So for audio track 2, let's start making some adjustments, some edits here using the audio track mixer. Now, if you open the audio track mixer and it looked like this, you don't have all these options here to insert effects. Don't worry, there's this little caret here on the upper left that says show hide effects and sends, and that's what you want to open up. Okay. You can see here that we have A1 would be track 1, A2 is track 2, A3 is track 3, and so on and so forth. I have them all renamed appropriately just for organization and so that you can follow along easily at home. Now, the first effect that I want to place, and everyone has their own process for doing this. I recommend playing around with it, but if you aren't sure where to start, this is one of your first times diving into the auto track mixer, I recommend starting with the parametric equalizer, which is under filter and EQ, parametric equalizer. And then we double click it and it opens another menu. You want to select this and open up vocal enhancer. So this applies a preset that enhances the vocals on this track. So I'm going to select like a little part of this so that it loops. If you don't have looping, you want to add looping. It's on the bottom right of your program monitor. You can add a loop playback. That way you can really listen to it. Alternatively, you can do it here, I believe. So up to you, but this is how you can hear the playback over and over, which you really need when you're audio editing, because otherwise you're not going to be able to tell the difference, which is why I wanted to make sure I had it on for you guys. Now, if I press play,
this means that aside from being a new
member, this is with it off. Let me play it with it off.
Being a new member, this means that aside from
now let me play it on.
Being a new member,
it's subtle, but it's there. If I wanted to put something a little bit more noticeable, maybe old time radio will sound a little more dramatic.
This means that aside from being a new member,
so you can hear there that it's on, just so you can make sure you guys can hear the difference. So I do parametric EQ first, vocal enhancer, kind of always works with dialogue. And then from there, I like to do dynamics under amplitude and compression. Double click to open all the settings. And the one that I tend to just default to is soft compression. We also have medium compression and hard compression. So it's up to you depending on the track that you have, how it sounds. I am going to play you soft compression. You can see it has compressor selected and that's it. I like to select the limiter and the auto gate, but I'll play it with and without just so you can hear it.
This means that aside from being a new member, this means that aside from being a new member,
so it doesn't sound like it did anything, but the auto gate basically blocks any of the sound under the -60 threshold in this case, but you can adjust this threshold. So I could say if I did everything under -10, we'll see here. I'm going to open up the levels here so you can see it. Now you can't hear anything because basically everything's under 10. So, but if I do -50,
this means that aside from being a new member,
it basically blocks all that noise, but it's like the levels behind that. It's not just going to mute it, but it's the levels behind it. That way it sounds cleaner. And you can really tell once you amplify it. So I have auto gate, limiter, compressor, perfect. And I might add a little bit of makeup. You would want to probably add more than this, but because I'm live, I don't want to blow your ears out.
New member, this means that aside from
so that's what it would sound like. So it's subtle, but it really is there.
This means that aside
I could do hard compression. You might hear a little better.
Aside from being a new member, this means that aside from being a new member,
okay, I'm gonna reset that negative. I'm gonna do -55. Basically, you can see here green. That means it's blocking stuff, and that's what you want to see because then you know that you're like blocking, clearing up that noise basically. Now, after doing the dynamic soft compression, I also like to add some denoise, just because sometimes when you're recording, there's a little bit of noise. I'm going to expand this selection. Okay, so we can hear it.
Member of an all-star roster.
And if you select output only, you'll be able to hear just what you're excluding. And I don't want to exclude, I don't want to get rid of parts of my voice. So as soon as I start hearing my voice too clearly, I know that's my limit with the noise remover, with the denoise. And then you want to unselect this. If you forget to select output noise only, then for the rest of the edit, you'll only hear like the negative essentially.
Agency. Okay. This means that aside from being a new member,
ooh, it's sounding a lot smoother. And then the other one I really like to add is, where is it? De-reverb under noise reduction and restoration. Double click, and it kind of has a default. I usually leave de-reverb at like around here, like 20.
All-star roster, I now have an agent.
So I'm going to put it on extreme so you can hear the difference.
This means that aside from being a new member of an all-star roster, I now have an agent, so I no longer I'm joining the call of agents.
If you do too much de-reverb or de-noise, you sound robotic and flat, so that's why you don't want to do that. I tend to leave it at around right there. It tends to be good.
Agency. This means that aside
sure you
from
have it
being a
on
new
now.
member of an all-star roster, I now have an agent, so I no longer I'm joining the call of agency. This means that aside from being a new member of
Cool. So that basically removes some of that echo that can happen when you are just in any sort of room. Unless you have a ton of soundproofing, you are going to get some reverb. And this really helps with that, doing it kind of in post. In a perfect world, you would have a lot of like curtains and stuff that will remove that echo from your space. But if you don't, de-reverb helps a bit. Wonderful. So now I have that set. I really like how this sounds. For the sake of the stream, I might just, there we go, just a little bit, I can hear.
Of an all-star roster, I now have an agent, so I no longer I'm joining the call of agency.
That sounds really nice and clean. So now another thing that I have on this timeline is I have this part of the timeline where it goes from voiceover to actual dialogue that I said in the clip itself. So let me play that for you so you can hear it.
This client feedback alone.
So you can barely hear that right now, and that's because of the settings right now. But also we want to fix that, right? We want to remedy that. It needs to be audible. Wait, the reason you can't hear that is because I have it in solo. All right, here we go.
Client feedback alone.
Okay, so they hate it. I feel like here, if I'm going to mute the music and the sound effects. So let me play that back again.
Client feedback alone.
Okay, so they hate it. It sounds okay. They sound similar, but it does sound like one is nice and crisp and the other one is like a little bit raw. Let me play it for you again.
Client feedback alone.
Okay, so they hate it. And we want them to match, right? So here's what we do. Instead of repeating all of that work, I can just hit right click, copy track effects, and then go over to the track that I want to affect, which would be track 1, clip audio. I do right click, paste track effects, and now they have the same exact effects. Let's play that through.
Client feedback alone.
Okay, so they hate it.
Agree to client terms by default or overbook myself because client feedback alone.
Okay, so they hate. Wonderful. Now, the one thing I am noticing is that maybe track 1 is a little louder than track 2, and I want track 2 to be the one that's louder. So I'm going to amplify track 2 by just doing an amplify setting, and I'm going to do, let's say, like a 0.3, like a +3 boost. Hate it.
Agree to client terms by default or overbook myself because client feedback alone.
Okay, so they hate it. And to make it even more noticeable, I'm going to do the same amplify setting, but here I'm going to do -3. So let's play that back.
This client feedback alone.
Okay, so they hate it. Maybe this one will be more dramatic, -6. Okay, let's see.
This client feedback alone.
Okay, so they hate it. Better. So that's how you can kind of make sure one is higher up than the other without having to manually write all the track effects. And I find that super, super handy. And you can also rearrange these and they slightly affect each other differently, but for the most part, it sounds pretty similar. So it's up to you to play around with that. But I really enjoy doing it in this order. Now let's go ahead and look at the sound effects. I'm going to remove the in and out. Make sure I'm muting what I want to mute and soloing what I want to solo. So now we just have actually I'm going to mute the music and play everything else.
This means that aside from being a new member of an all-star roster,
so that sparkle is really, really way too loud compared to the dialogue that we have going on. So what I want to make sure to do here is on the audio track 3 is where I have the sound effects, and let me show you one way you could do it. We could go into slot 1, amplitude and compression, amplify, and then just use these sliders to slide it all the way to like -23. Let's see how that works.
Aside from being a new member of an all-star roster, I now have an agent. So
but it's a bit low across all of them. And it's like you want sound effects sometimes to shine through and really like, you don't want it to be background music. You want it to shine through, right? So I'm going to remove, I mean, you could leave it at maybe 10. Let's see here, -12. Let's see what that sounds like.
Aside from being a new member of an all-star roster, I now have an agent. So I no longer.
So it's definitely more present, but it's quite flat a little bit, you know? So I'm going to show you another way to do it. I'm just going to turn off this effect by hitting this power button here. You can turn all the effects on and off by doing that without having to remove them entirely. So that's a cool thing about the audio track mixer is you can quickly like undo things, put it back exactly how you had it without having to make some more permanent changes and permanent edits. All right, so all right, that's off. Cool. Now, another thing that you can do to affect the entire track, but in a more custom way, is actually keyframe the volume for the entire duration of the track. So if you see here, right now it's on touch, but if we had everything is usually when you first start out on read, and that means that it's basically reading what has been placed there before. So if you made any changes in the audio clip mixer, it'll play that. But let me show you. You can watch it here as it goes.
This means that aside from being a new member of an all-star roster, I now have an agent.
So because there are no keyframes, you would notice that these little volume levers aren't moving at all.
This means that aside from being a new member of an all-star roster,
though the levels in the different tracks are, you can read them here, they're not actually shifting at all. So that shows you that there's no keyframes there to be read, which makes sense because I started this without anything. But let's go ahead and make some keyframes using the audio track mixer. And this is what's really cool about the audio track mixer. It lets you write those keyframes kind of in real time. So you can listen and make those adjustments as you go. All right. So to start that, you have to make sure that the track that you want to write the keyframes in is actually, you change the setting from read. I keep wanting to say read or read, so bear with me, but from read, you want to go to write. So now we are writing keyframes instead of reading keyframes on track 3. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hit play. It starts at 0, right? The volume's at 0. So that's fine. I'm going to allow that because there's nothing here in the beginning. Here, let me actually expand some of this so it's easier to see. All right, we have really big. There we go. Okay. I'm going to maybe make the video portion a little smaller. Yeah. We have the levels here on the right. We have everything is a lot bigger so that you guys can understand how I'm doing this. So track 3 is this track right here. This one is the one that you need to be watching. I'm going to right click and change the color of it. Oh, I can't without, okay, I'm going to leave it like that. So to actually write the keyframes, you got to make sure it's in right, and then you press play. I'm pressing spacebar in this case, and you're able to basically start writing those keyframes live. So you want to basically have your mouse on that as soon as you press play.
I'm joining the collab agency. This means that aside from being a new member of an all-star roster, I now have an agent, so I no longer have to answer my own emails, process client feedback alone.
Okay, so they hate it.
Agree to client terms by default, or overbook myself because I feel bad saying no.
I can do it.
I'm so excited to be
All right, so you could see I wrote those keyframes live and it inserted those keyframes exactly as I go. And I actually have custom settings here that tell Adobe how many keyframes to make per volume change. So you can see here, I didn't change if I don't go dramatically, it only does, let me zoom in here. We have this keyframe and then this keyframe. There's not a million little keyframes in the middle. And that's because I have a setting. So let me show you that setting in case you don't have it set up. It would look a lot different. So let me quickly, I'm going to hit this, switch to clip keyframe. So you're not going to see anything. But this is just so I can duplicate it, and I'm moving it down. I'm duplicating it so you can compare. And I'm not going to move this because I don't want to mess it up with here. So I've brought it down to audio track 5. And if you go into Premiere Pro settings, audio, I have here, you'll see audio, and then there's automation keyframe optimization, which is what we're doing. Linear keyframe thinning, that's what we want. So that this will always be selected. There's no need to unselect it. But this one, if you don't have it selected, it will default to about 20 milliseconds. So I'm going to put it at 20 just so we can see the difference. So this might be what your software is by default. So if you go to, if we do it like this, now I'm going to write on track 5. So I'm going to make sure I have write. Okay. I'm going to hit play, and then I'm going to start writing those keyframes by adjusting this slider.
I'm joining the collab agency. This means that aside from being a new member of an all-star roster, I now have an agent.
And I press spacebar to stop. You don't see those keyframes because I forgot to turn them on. But if you go to, in case you're not seeing them yourself and you're like, I'm not writing them, I'm not seeing it, I have a flat line, don't sweat it. You have to go to show keyframes, track keyframes, volume, and then they'll pop up. So look at the difference here. I got to make sure they're back on for this one. Look at the difference in how many keyframes were written with the default setting, which is this, and the settings that I had customized. There's a lot more keyframes. Here I have 1, 2, 3. Here I have, oh my gosh, probably like 30 more keyframes. And of course, they're all customizable, which is great. So you can always edit after the fact. But do you really want to have this many if you're just trying to go from, you know, high to low? You can just edit it right there. So this is one reason that I really like to have that setting adjusted. So just as a reminder, now that I've turned it back to the default, I'm going to show you how you can fix it. Settings, audio, go to minimum time interval thinning right here. Minimum time, I had it originally at 1000. You could do even 750 is going to be something, is going to be creating less keyframes per millisecond of volume change. I think it's how they word it. And that's going to help you kind of keep a clean keyframe timeline, be able to edit it better. So what I'm going to do is change this one more time. Now, on audio track 5, if I still, it switched from write to touch. Touch basically is like it's reading it and you're able to adjust it while it's reading it. So I'm going to play that through.
I'm joining the collab agency.
For example, I can move it all the way up.
From being a new member of an all-star roster.
Okay, and now it rewrote that with the under the touch setting. It rewrote it, and you can see here we have a lot more keyframes this time, a lot less keyframes this time because I changed my Adobe settings. So that's how it gets affected. It's really nice, and it's pretty easy to adjust and get a hang of how to do some custom keyframing. And then lastly, the other one is latch is another setting that you can use on the audio track mixer. And this one means that basically it will keep the last keyframe that you had. So instead of reverting back and reading what you have left, it will basically stay wherever you leave the slider. So if I play it,
I'm joining the collab agency. This means that aside from being a
and then I decided to pull it all the way down,
roster,
it stays all the way down.
Agent.
So you can see it stayed right here, all the way down. So those are the differences within those settings. But just to show you how I would actually want to do it, I'm going to mute this track because that was just to show you the differences. The way that I would actually want to keyframe this is having this be a little bit less high, moving these keyframes lower. And by having that initial keyframe, you're able to, but that initial automation that I keyframed, I can then adjust it with all these points, keyframes, so that it's like exactly what I want. So I'm just adjusting it. I know I want this shimmer to come in, but I want it to be a lot lower. I want these sounds to be lower. And this is like a ticking sound, and I want that to go from low to high so you can really build up the pressure. Let me play that for you real quick.
Fall or overbook myself because I feel bad saying no.
I can do it. I'm so... There you go. So that's how I would use the auto track mixer for sound effects. And then lastly, for music, I'm going to solo it so we can hear it. Let me play it through at where it is right now. Pretty high. I would simply just do an amplify and turn this down and do it down to -15. Let's play that through. I'm not going to solo it so you can hear it with everything.
Joining the collab agency. This means that aside from being a new member of an all-star...
That's not bad. I might even turn it down to -20 if I'm trying to be real specific with it.
Roster, I now have an...
Great. And the last thing I want to show you in the last few seconds we have here is if you go to special mastering here on the last most track, this affects all of the tracks. You can go to mastering, hit subtle clarity, and it will add a bit of subtle clarity to your entire mix and master your video for you. Let me play this through with and without it.
I'm joining the collab agency. This means that aside from being a new member of an all-star roster, I now have an agent.
You can hear that it boosts kind of the vocals, it pushes down some of the music. It just makes it sound really clear and crisp. So I really love adding this last bit of mastering to my audio because it applies to the entire effects. If you put it here on the last mix track, it applies to the entire timeline and it just sounds really good.
I no longer have to answer my own emails, process client feedback alone.
Okay, so they hate it.
Agree to client terms by default.
So that's how you can use the audio track mixer to really level up your audio editing. And this way you're using it and being more efficient than editing with, let's say, something like the Essential Sound Panel, which is great. But if you want to, audio edit the entire mix, the audio track mixer is really great for that. And you're just being more effective, efficient. I think the effects are a little bit more precise and you can really fine tune your audio edit when you use the audio track mixer. So I highly recommend using it in your next video and just really paying attention to the different levels of the effects that you have and of the dialogue and everything that you're putting in your audio edit in your video. So I hope that helped you guys, and let me know if you have any questions. Be sure to just DM me over on Instagram if you have any questions, and stay tuned for the next Adobe Live. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye.